play is completely wrong in conception, style, set, and everything. There was booing from the front, shocked and stunned, gasping their ohs and ahs. You could hear that. Oh! Ah! Oh! Decoding came off shouting, "I can't wrong with the cancer!" and crying. The cast is demoralized, the script practically in rags, and found it complete nonsense. You should never set foot near the rotten mess. The show went like spirit pudding. Playing this stuff is like trying to catch bath water in your hands. It keeps slipping through your fingers. What an effect this show is having on us all. I've got the shivers and the shakes. The lowest I've ever been since this production began. I weep all the time. So I got suicidally depressed. I just didn't know what to do. The utter shambles of the production now. Lawrence Olivier came round and said, "You haven't got to stay here. That's your trouble." And grinned a lot and kissed me.
Kenneth Williams was one of the greatest comic performers of the 20th century. With his mobile face, his way-over-the-top delivery, and his array of eccentric and hilarious voices, he was the dream guest of every chat show host. From a humble working-class background, he became one of Britain's most loved film stars. With the help of his lifelong friend, Stanley Baxter, we've gained unprecedented access to his private world, including never-before-seen unpublished parts of his diaries, untransmitted interviews, and footage not seen in some cases for over 50 years, as well as private photos and access to the house he grew up in. What follows is not a standard cradle-to-the-grave biography of Kenneth Williams. We've all seen plenty of those before. Instead, we're seeking to overturn some of the recycled myths and lazy cliches that have distorted our collective memory of this great comic actor and writer. Many of our best and funniest finds were audio recordings, so we've animated some of those. This is the Undiscovered Kenneth Williams. It's often said that Kenneth Williams lived in humble surroundings. But Marchmont Street, off the Euston Road, where he was raised, has the highest density of blue plaques on its buildings anywhere in London. His esteemed neighbours over the generations included Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein, the conductor Sir John Barbarolli, the poet Sir William Empson, and the composer William Reeve.
Footsteps. Come in, don't be shy. Welcome. What can I do for you?
And this is the front door that Kenneth walked through from his childhood on. There's young Kenneth wearing a hoop around his head. Children, in those days, who wanted to become famous, always wore a hoop in school photos. Perhaps it's coincidental, but when the Williams family lived there, the area was down on its uppers. Kenneth's lifelong friend, Stanley Baxter, recalls his first meeting with Kenneth's father, Charlie, who at that time was obsessing over some local serial urinators.
So, apart from complaining about the men pissing down into the area where they lived, because they lived in a basement, these bastards come along and piss down the area. So I had to say, I'm so sorry to hear you've been troubled. But he went in through a lobby and down a stair to a rather squalid basement, which is where they had their living accommodation.
The interior design of the house has changed vastly, but the structure remains much the same, as do the views from his bedroom window. This was his bedroom where he'd write in the diary he kept throughout his life. We'll see more of the unpublished ones later. In 1940, during the Blitz, young Kenneth underwent an evacuation to middle-class Oxfordshire. In rural Bicester, he quickly lost his rough London accent and underwent another evacuation.
Oh, yes, it's changed very little.
This time of his vowels.
Marvellous.
You had a four-poster bed?
Oh, yes, four-poster beds. No electricity, but candelabras he gave you to light your way out to bed. And a room full of fabulous books. His library was enormous.
We found this rare recording, made shortly before Kenneth's death, and untransmitted since then, in which he talks about living with posh foster parents.
When the school was evacuated, you know, we were all sent out of London when the bombs were falling. I was put into a home because you were always found foster parents with a family. And I was put into this home, and I didn't like the life at all. I didn't like sharing this house and these people. I didn't like... I mean, I come from my own place, you know, I knew...
If you were evacuated, it couldn't have been a nice time for you.
No, it was horrid, but I found the allotment, took my mind off things, and next door was this old man who gave me tips and said, put your bit of straw around the strawberry. The birds will get your strawberry. Put straw around your strawberry. And I had a lot of tips from this old man, and I got to like him very much. And I said, could I come to live with you? I was very young.
As this school report shows, Kenneth clearly put his newfound gardening skills to use.
And this says, has made very good progress. and has done very well on his allotment. On his allotment. I wouldn't expect to see that in a school report, you bitch.
And he even referenced that later in this sketch from his one-off show for the BBC in 1976.
Gardening? I can do all that gardening, chat. Oh, yes, I'll show you. Well, no. Here we are. Autumn's come round. Autumn's come round again, and the answer lies in the soil.
It's clear that Kenneth Williams lost his enthusiasm for gardening in adult life because there wasn't so much as a flower box in his flat, let alone an allotment.
That should be all right. Can you just say
Is it facing right?
Yes.
Yes. Now, the ways, the long and short of it is, you see, that the answer will lie in the soil, I think. Don't you agree? The answer lies in the soil.
Right.
Is that all right, Val?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
All diaries are written to be read, even the most private ones. But as these never-before-published entries reveal, Kenneth often wrote in a code, much as Samuel Pepys had done 3 centuries earlier.
T-O-T-O-D-A-Y.
A code that prying readers couldn't crack, doubtless due to a growing awareness that he was gay in an era when homosexuality was an imprisonable offence.
I've got the traditional worries.
Moreover, living with an intolerant father whose views on gay sex would put even an Old Testament prophet to shame,
He told me he was TBH.
a diary containing codes seemed sensible.
Oh, he had a dolly ECAF.
Not even the Enigma machine was able to decipher this code, which presumably describes adolescent fumblings.
Homo sumi obripens.
So Charlie and Louis didn't stand a chance. In today's comparatively liberal times, it's difficult to explain the morality of an era when 2 men could be in prison simply for having consensual sex. Yet television and radio were full of the most explicit campery, happily transmitted by mainstream broadcasters and lapped up by mainstream audiences. Here, Kenneth Williams takes part in a mildly homophobic sketch, drawing on his army experiences. Come on, it's the 1970s, suck it up. Ooh, ah.
Attention! Get your feet up, you horrible little recruits. You're not alone with Mother now. I'm your mother. So listen when I call your names. Now let's have some reverse order numbering. From the left, reversing order, number 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Right, let's have it again. In reverse order, number 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Are you one?
Oh, yes. You went too.
When young working-class gay men like Kenneth were conscripted during World War II, they tended to gravitate to the force's theatrical troops. In this next student TV clip from 1971, never seen beyond a university campus, Kenneth talks about how he got into the theatrical section of the armed forces.
I think it would be fair to say that your first appearances in comedy would be in the army, I think.
I've never done any theatre at all, but I thought, well, they're very good. I can do it better than they do. Because I'd seen people act, oh, they're terrible. I can do it much better than that. So I thought it would be a good idea. Now it's an audition in Singapore, Victoria Theatre. It was the same theatre where during the day they tried Shigemitsu, the Japanese general, for war crimes, atrocities or whatever, and they chopped his head off, and I thought something like that was going to happen to me. But I went on the stage, and they said, it was colonels all sitting in the front row, all right, next, what do you do? And I said, impersonations. Impersonate who? And I said, Winston Churchill, because everyone did Winston Churchill. We are we shall never. I always did that. It was quite a good sort of impression, you see. And they all sat there, and there was a lot of whispering, you see, and eventually they said, no, thank you, RTU, RTU. And a corporal in the wing said, RTU, and a private in the wing said, RTU, and they echoed this RTU all over the place. And I came off the wing and said, tearfully, what does it mean, RTU? And a sympathetic bystander said, return to unit, mate. I went down to the stalls, and I attacked these 3 colonels and cried, and said, you can't do it, you can't do it, you bastard! And they all said, for God's sake, it's meant to be MO. And so that's how I stayed on.
Ah, there's Kenneth in the army, still wearing that hoop around his head. In the armed forces, he discovered a world where enlisted young men could join the entertainment troops, dress up as women, and behave with such gay, uninhibited Rabelaisian abandon, it made the carry-on movies look like a board meeting for the Inland Revenue. We found this reel-to-reel tape with Kenneth, totally unguarded, talking about some of the sexual shenanigans that went on in the barracks. You might need a strong cup of tea or a swift blood transfusion before we play it. Now, to that candid audio tape of Kenneth talking about the sexual shenanigans in the army. Well, switch it on. I haven't got all day.
I was escorting a TO in charge of civilians that came out to entertain these fucking troop. And Barry Chad was one of these female impersonators and was appalling. I mean, behaved dreadfully. And had a sort of vast silk handkerchief drenched in Chanel, which she's got draped around her and kept crying out to a woman's girl. Two people like colonels in the Cameron Highlanders. And the English officer class, especially in officers' messes, don't like that kind of thing at all, you know. And she drifted in, stinking of perfume, saying, dreadful things to these sort of men, like, "Oh, what are you going to titillate the palace with tonight, darlings?" And used to hand away with people like the cinema operator in the military camp, so that the reel of film would start going around wrong, where she was having it up there in the projection room, and the troops sounds their hand backing, in the cinema, it was all just going wrong. He was getting more and more work cut up there with Barry Chad.
Oh, and after this mammoth research carried out by our mammoth researcher, he's called Eric, and he uses his tusks as marling spikes, we believe this photo to be of the legendary Barry Chad. In Singapore, Kenneth met his lifelong friend, Stanley Baxter, now an amazingly well-preserved 91-year-old. Can Stanley remember their first encounter?
Indeed I can. I met him in Singapore at the main theatre there. I wish I could remember the name. So I found the stage door, went in, and I was almost immediately greeted by this, what looked like a childlike figure, except dressed as a grandfather. And I thought, who the hell's this? "Hello, my name's Kenneth Williams." And I thought, well, you certainly sound as if you're running the show. I'm sure you're not, but you certainly sound with great authority. I said, "What's it all about?" "Well, dear, there's nobody out there. The place is empty. We're playing to nothing. And somebody said, "Here, Ken, we've got the girls, you know. Is Stan coming with us?" "Yes, he is." I said, "Well, we've got the girls." "Oh, fuck the girls." And I think that's what they'd all done anyway. So I said, "Look, I don't need to come with you. Come to me." "No, you don't come. You'll come with us."
After they were both demobbed, Kenneth went back home to London. Stanley headed for London soon after to seek work. His memories of his friendship with Kenneth at that time still generate strong emotions in him.
Yes, very, very much so. Well, he was the only person I knew. The only person I knew in London. And so I had nobody else to ring. And I rang him up. And he said, "Well, I've got my own room, but that's as much as can be said for it. It's above my father's hairdressers."
As for Kenneth's parents, Stanley was alternately impressed and appalled by them.
But when I met Charlie and the mother, I realised the mother had been the biggest influence. But Charlie himself was quite a character.
Kenneth had recently been involved in a restoration comedy.
And he said, I took my parents to see it, and my father just hated it. "I certainly did, Ken," said father, who then emerged from the background, came into foreground. "Stan, I've never seen such rubbish in my life," he said. He was very cockney. He said, "Oh, they're all your bum shit, you know, and sticks and handkerchiefs floating in the air, a load of puffs." Oh, he said, I've never seen it. He said, 2 days later, I went to see it. It was a beautiful film. Stanley, if you haven't seen it, I recommend it. It was so moving, you know. A really great work. I said, what was it called? Son of Lassie.
Lassie aside, it seems that Kenneth's father encouraged the family to go to all the hit movies of the time.
Saw All Quiet on the Western Front and cried. Most beautiful and moving film. Saw Rawhide with the folks. Saw Anna Karenina. Starred Vivian Leigh and Ralph Richardson.
You didn't get on awfully well with your dad, though, did you?
Well, insofar as the job was concerned, no. He wanted a trade. He was always like, "You've got to get a trade, boy. You must have a trade." You get on about trade all the time. Yes. obviously a few here that have come under parental control. Actually, my father's belief in this was based on appalling poverty because he'd never had one himself. He was a van boy on the LMS and brought up, you know, his family, my mother and 2 children, in a couple of rooms off the Caledonian Road, and felt very keenly this awful early poverty.
Did he talk like you?
My father was a Cockney. No, he didn't talk like me at all. No, he hated my kind of talk. He always said, what are you going around with a plum in your mouth for? Talk like that for? Putting it on, giving yourself airs. Well, I wasn't giving myself airs at all. I see talk like this because I rather like drawing out vowel sounds, because the English language is full of the most beautiful vowel sounds. Lovely. I remember Mervyn Peake, when I did that play, The Wit to Woo, saying plum and bum are lovely sounds, and they are. They're so round and rich, aren't they? Beautiful sounds.
Much has been written about Kenneth's obsession with scatology and his obsession with privacy, most famously the legendary lav. And yet, Kenneth is often paradoxical, as this never-transmitted clip shows, where he clearly felt that the world would be a better place if it had a no-holds-barred attitude to bodily functions.
Never. That's the nice thing about coming here, you see. One does feel one can be completely uninhibited. Well, that's what's so marvellous about it, and I'm taking no fee, so I don't feel beholden. I say fart and all that kind of thing, and people... I mean, when I was originally doing it a lot, I did it on the Evan Andrews show. I talked about farting at great length there, because I think it's a genuine thing to discuss. After all, what reason is there in an artificial society like us where we all lock each other into rooms, tiny little rooms, to do these things, these bowel movements? I read once that a father had tried an experiment with his child whereby the lavatory was open the whole time. And I remember thinking at the time it was a very, very good thing, but that's beside the point.
In his younger days, Kenneth was also intolerant of shoddy workmanship. He was a do-it-yourselfer. The early diaries reveal that he spent considerable amount of time laying linoleum, hammering nails, painting.
Camden Town, wallpaper for dad. Painted his sign this afternoon. Varnishing chairs, much nicer all round. Fixed mirror in hall and did odd jobs around the house. Purchased new door handles and applied. Decorating bedroom for M. Purchased stair carpet and laid it on stairs. Broke the lavatory. In a mad, zealous clean-up. Tried to mend it with some glue. Hope it works.
Maybe he was trying to impress his father with some stereotypical machismo behavior. But for whatever reason, probably that he started to earn big bucks, he didn't keep it up in later life, as a carry-on script might say. It took some considerable effort to get access to Kenneth's diaries in the British Library. This is a page from a diary. This is me filming the film crew, filming the diary. Yes, I know I'm not cameraman of the year. And there was somebody filming me, filming them, filming the diary, but this could go on for days, and I've got a dentist appointment in the morning. The crew were very nervous because the librarians watched their every move, clearly terrified that we might film something that shouldn't be made public. Why are the authorities at the British Library scared to death of him to this day? All will be revealed shortly. As I was saying a little earlier, we asked the British Library for access to all the Williams diaries. After all, only 20% have been published, but within seconds of making the request, we were banned from so much as looking at several volumes. One librarian, sorry gatekeeper, sorry centurion, said, and I quote, "In particular, the 1965 diary is closed for sensitivity reasons, where the data is likely to cause substantial distress or harm to the data subject. We have therefore to withhold said item from public access, and that includes film crews," which is us. I mean, librarian says don't read books. However, photocopies were made of some of the unpublished diaries many years ago, and since it's not possible to libel the dead, I can say unequivocally that Kenneth wrote that Sir John Gielgud was a pathological queen, Sir Winston Churchill was a hypocritical rat bag, Charles Hawtrey was pissed and his breath stank, and Joan Sims was a cow-c***ed mare.
No, he took a liking to people. And if he didn't like them, pity helped them in the diaries. I mean, even people that we rather liked. And I said, how did you get on with, oh, that one, rubbish. My dear, just rubbish. Oh, what a bore. And he said, oh, any stories? Nah, I could tell you stories, all right, but I'm not going to. And this would go, yeah. And if he liked you, that was fine.
Kenneth liked some people a great deal, and thanks to even more mammoth research by our mammoth researcher Eric, we can now reveal that Kenneth had a very close relationship for most of his life with a woman. Yes, this explosive photo of the couple, relax, it's all very innocent. The mystery woman is actually his sister, Pat. That got you going. However, pictured here next to a 22-year-old Kenneth actually is his first and only serious girlfriend. Sonia More is referred to in the early unpublished diaries. Kenneth appears to have courted her in the early summer of 1948, but he was soon complaining in his diary about her.
Went out for supper with Sonia this evening. Expensive, but just had to. She hasn't paid yet, and doesn't look like she's ever likely to offer. To hell with bloody girls.
Kenneth Williams didn't have many living relatives, but he did have a godson, Robert Chidell, who we tracked down. Robert didn't want the fuss of our cameras around him, but he was happy to show some of his possessions that he inherited when Kenneth died, including birthday letters and this picture of Kenneth at Robert's baptism.
Oh, this is a photo of, because he helped me at my christening. My dad said it was very funny because Kenneth was taking it very seriously. Well, I've got a few items of Kenneth's. Yeah, I bought a pair of half-moon glasses. Oh, there's my prized possession is a book called I Only Have to Close My Eyes, which he wrote. It was dedicated to me on the inlay, it says for Robert Chidell, and also he's written a note on the inlay and signed it. Below that it says, I promise it was meant when you were much younger, Robert. Love, Kenneth Williams. So this is my absolute prized possession. I bought a couple of like day-by-day diaries with the ring binder type ones, because he kept obviously intensive full diaries, but he also had day-by-day ones for brief notes. I mean, when you look through it, for me it does kind of emphasise the contrasts in his life, as it will be in many actors' life, where they're going shopping, going to the dentist, and then I've got an interview on Russell Harty's show.
Although Kenneth was a gifted mimic and a brilliant comic actor in the Carry On films, his greatest talent was to play an exaggerated version of himself on chat shows, like Russell Harty.
Have you fallen in love ever?
No, I don't think it's possible for someone like me. I'm a complete egotist, you see, and my world revolves about myself. First thing in the morning, I look in the mirror and think, what a dish, I think, all that, this wonderful figure, I mean, and this hair, spun gold, it's been described. I've been described as, a head of spun gold. I hope they're getting it in colour. And I love all that aspect of myself, and I spend hours looking at the body and thinking, all this beauty, and I wouldn't want to share it. I did this broadcast recently, and I mentioned that a girl I knew, there was a question about when did you first go out with a girl? And this was at school, and I mentioned this girl I went out with, and I said that she'd peed in the gutter. She did. She said, it's all right. She said, it's all right if you're taking short. She said, it's all right. And I mentioned this, and I got loads of letters saying, how disgraceful. Talking about people peeing. And everyone gets sort of worked out about it. I always think it's very interesting.
The trademark of Kenneth's humour was a mixture of gentle sophistication and Rabelaisian vulgarity, as exemplified in this rare moment from the Rushes.
50 take one.
The Carry On series, you see, was always dominated by the fact
Don't mark it.
Was it well established in the Carry-Ons, that is to say, there was a tremendously free atmosphere. And with Gerald Thomas, who was a very friendly and warm personality, you got that feeling that you could do it. You could do outrageous things. I mean, I frequently did, At one juncture, this great love scene, I was so uninhibited, I broke wind in the middle of the love scene. This terrible fart rang out, you see. And they said, cut, that fart is on the soundtrack. We can't use it, you see. And Joan Sims rose and all this tremendous silk grandeur. She was some sort of duchess. And said, how can you make love to people who are blowing off like that? It's disgraceful, isn't it? And I said, don't talk such rubbish. Everyone's human. We're all human and vulnerable. Even Valentino blew off. And the director, Gerald Thomas, said, yes, but they were silent films.
It's easy to think nowadays that Britain was a joyful, liberal, hedonistic place in the swinging 60s. But apart from a couple of heavily filmed shops in Carnaby Street, London didn't really start swinging until the early 70s. And I'm told that it's debatable whether it's hit Hartlepool even now. For most people, in the 1960s, it was a grey, grim country, which is why, for historical accuracy, this film should now bleed into black and white. Thank you. Britain was a grey, grim country of chronic censorship, chronic deference, a vicious class system, and bad food. Almost everyone had bad teeth, so mercifully they couldn't even eat the bloody awful food. As for gay sex, it was strictly illegal and frequently took place in dark, dank gentlemen's lavatories. Kenneth couldn't stand the claustrophobia of the British establishment. It's mind-boggling to think of Kenneth Williams as an anti-establishment figure, but in a private conversation recorded in the early 70s, Kenneth seemed to consider himself as much a rebel as his friend, playwright Joe Orton.
Well, both of us disliked, I think, enormously the pretension of establishment class. Both of us hate formal functions. I don't, because I sit in a jacket, and a lot of people think that is extraordinary in terms of having to attend certain functions and things like that. Every time anything comes up, like Downing Street, I always write back and say thank you, no.
As this picture shows, Kenneth had no qualms at all about airing his anti-establishment views in public. Maybe this is why natural rebels like Kenneth Williams and Joe Orton frequently holidayed in the Middle East, where almost anything was permitted.
Not hearing English for so long, which you don't hear. I mean, you might meet the odd English tourists, but I steer clear of them. I just heard Arabs and sign language my way through a whole 6 weeks there, and I think it was sort of therapy.
Therapy indeed, as this entry in Joe Orton's diary makes very clear. I'm basically guilty about being homosexual, Kenneth said. You shouldn't be, I said. Get yourself fucked if you want to. Reject all the values of society and enjoy sex. When you're dead, you'll regret not having fun with your genital organs. As these rare pictures show, Kenneth certainly appears to have enjoyed some therapy, or at least the company of young Moroccan men. Oh, and seemingly Boris Johnson, too. You'd think that Kenneth Williams, a home-loving man who seldom travelled outside of King's Cross, would make a very nervous tourist, particularly about strolling around the Tangier streets at night, but not a bit of it, as this never-released recording reveals. Joe Orton used Kenneth as his personal bodyguard, the last role you'd expect Kenneth to play.
And when he asked me to walk with him in the Rue Dante, it was late, he said, would you come with me? And I said, why? And he said, because the Rue Dante can be very dangerous, and these Arabs sometimes carry knives. And I said, well, it's ludicrous. Nobody's going to murder him. So I had to walk with him. It's ludicrous to imagine it. I walk up and down those sort of streets. Extremely late at night, come away from seeing somebody and say good night and walked up to my hotel, which was in the Rembrandt, about 2 blocks away. But it meant traversing the street, and I don't have any fear about doing so.
Give away anything.
Apropos of nothing, here's something Eric has discovered from a decades unopened film can. Kenneth always avoided dancing for stage and television, but it appears he couldn't resist some high leg hoofing in this performance on a BBC programme called Let's Make a Musical. Okay, Kenny, and a left kick, 3, 4, and right kick, 4, 2, kick, step right, up, next, 4, 3, 1, 4. Oh dear, after watching this clip of Kenneth hoofing Douglas Bader style, one is left thinking, yes, we really must make a musical because this ain't one. It's a cliché that Kenneth disliked his father, but adored his mother. But is it valid to portray this as a typical Freudian gay son loves mother scenario? As with almost everything in Kenneth's life, things are never that cut and dried. And at times, contrary to received wisdom, he could be as surprisingly critical about his mother Louis as he could about his father Charlie.
You know, having to bring up his kids. Never always my mother would say that, his kids. My mother would always say to him at meals, they're your children, why don't you tell him about his aunt? They're your kids, aren't they? Always these remarks were made. And my mother lived in this fantasy of other places, other times, other opportunities, which I was never given. And my mother going off into continual fantasies about had I done what I should have done when I was Daisy Dormer's dresser.
Daisy Dormer was a minor star of the Victorian musical. Had I gone off on tour with her, I could have been a star. Well, none of it has any validity. In actual fact, what Daisy Dormer offered her was a job as laundress. But anyway, it's long, the laundry bit's long forgotten, and it's become the stage and the glamour that life could have been, but for him, not for him, not for him.
In fact, Daisy Dormer wasn't the minor performer Kenneth dismissively portrayed her as. She was actually one of the biggest music hall stars of the Edwardian era. For Kenneth, he was the big star of the family, and he clearly didn't want any hint that anyone else in his family might have had a brush with fame. Before I was thrown out of the British Library, I managed to get graphologist Adam Brand to have a quick perusal of some of Kenneth's diaries. Some ologies are bona fide subjects like biology, while others, like astrology, only ever proved a single scientific fact that there's one born every minute. Graphology lies somewhere in the middle, being part scientific and part interpretation. Take it away, Adam.
Look at this phenomenally strong oblique stroke starting that M. Much, much all round. It shows his sensitivity. He does an M like lots of pointed U's, which is a sign of tremendously rapid comprehension. I love the variability of this writing. I mean, this is a this is a PhD study in itself. I mean, look at the speed with which he connects his writing. I mean, this man is outstanding.
Kenneth could dish it out, but he didn't like being on the receiving end of criticism.
We have some T-bars that are quite open and loopy, and when you have a loop instead of a straight up and down, you have somebody who's quite sensitive to criticism.
Ah, thank you, Adam. Kenneth was indeed very sensitive. As this never shown in the UK Australian talk show demonstrates, Kenneth had utter contempt for critics and was happy to let them know it. Well, TV critics, what sort of job is that?
Critics, yes, critics. I can't stand them. I mean, I must be so wounded on so many occasions. I think they should all the critics, I think, should go and have a nice lie down in the middle of the freeway. I really...
What's your feeling on it?
Well, you know, Brendan Behan. You remember Brendan Behan?
The
brilliant
Irish
playwright, wasn't he? And he said about the critics, they're like the eunuchs in the harem. They're there every night, they see it done every night, they know how it should be done every night, but they can't do it themselves.
If the British critics at the time had been able to view this Aussie show and discovered his true views about them, they would have gone straight for the jugular, wouldn't they, Kenneth?
You can say that again. You can say that again.
They would have gone straight for the jugular, wouldn't they, Kenneth? His intense dislike of critics probably stemmed from the negative feedback he received at the very start of his career.
That when he said that he wanted to go on with the business when he was demobbed, people said, he'll be lucky. Oh, he's got no chance. He's too camp. He looks too effeminate. I don't think he's got any hope at all. I said, well, you might get a surprise there. But I know what you mean. He's a rather unusual talent to cope with.
And those are, of course, the critics, who I know you adore.
You must be joking, right? There is something fundamentally ridiculous about criticism insofar as what is good without anybody saying so. That's a fact, isn't it?
Yeah.
So critics are useless. The other kind of thing, which is what I would call academic knocking, you know, there are people who set themselves up as, I know my subject academically, therefore I am an arbiter and a judge. People like Harold Hobson do this all the time. He actually says things like, although these people are my friends, I learned that from his column. Although these people are my friends, he said it about production of the Hammersmith Theatre Club. Although these people are my friends, I must nevertheless pronounce judgment. Now, he's talking as though he's a judge in a high court, saying, although these people I'm trying here, these criminals, are my friends, I've had drinks with them and all the rest of it, I'm still going to say, you must die. Now, the idea that a critic has these sort of powers, well, that's just self-delusion. I think it's self-delusion of senility.
Well, it proved them all wrong, of course, and became more famous than any of the critics.
Kenneth Williams spent a lifetime analysing and performing the art of campery like no one else. Here, from the rare student TV programme we saw earlier, he gives a succinct definition of the word.
I remember being in Burma at the HQ, Mountbatten's HQ, And we arrived with a group of civilian entertainers, and one was what you would describe today as an outrageous poof. And he did a marvellous sort of pirouette about 8 times and said to a general with red tabs who had a map rolled under his arm and binoculars, he said, "Tell your mother we're here, dear, put the kettle on." And this bloke said, "Oh, yeah, there's a kettle on, obviously one of those theatricals that Emily was saying," and accepted it. This is the point. I mean, and just as Kenneth Hall accepted his 2 outrageous things that Marty Feldman wrote, what they called Jewel and Sand, accepted them, was interested in them, and wasn't at all appalled. Well, that meant that this kind of comedy had no end. You know what I mean? You could go on and on, evolving endless formulas around that.
Kenneth shows what he meant in this sketch, not seen for 40 years, where he takes a workaday script and turns it into a magnificent solo tour de force, all about not having a 15p underground tube ticket.
If you will kindly pay at the point of entry in future, sir. It is a criminal offence to travel without having previously obtained a ticket or the relevant authority.
I've never been on the underground before. I thought it was like a bus where you waited for the conductor to come.
It's people like you that loses us £30 million a year.
I can't think how you manage to lose 30 million a year when you chase me for 15p.
Talk about, sir.
I've never been on the tube before. Looks like a bus. Well, all right, I have been on the tube before. Some of you have probably seen me in the mornings, but I did have a ticket. Must have dropped out of my pocket on the way, probably on the escalator, but I didn't tell him that. No point in telling him. They'd never believe it, would they? They never do believe it when you tell them the truth, do they? Yes, it must have fallen through the hole. I got a hole in my pocket, you see. That's what happened. I expect it went through the hole in my pocket. I can show it to you. There's... Oh, well, my wife must have sewn it up this morning. I didn't have a hole there, I can assure you, and I didn't have a ticket. It must have dropped out. I expect that's what happened. It must have dropped out. I didn't have... Well, all right, I didn't have a ticket. Now, I couldn't get a ticket because there was a bit of a queue at the ticket office. So I put some money in the machine, and no ticket came out. That's it. No ticket came out, but I was going to get a ticket. I can assure you, I most was going to... I wasn't going to get a ticket. I only had a £1 note. I had no change to put in the machine anyway. But I was going to pay the other end. I was going to pay the other end, and I wasn't going to lie about where I got on either. No, I wouldn't have dreamed of doing a thing like that. I wouldn't dream of lying when I got on. No. All right, I was going to lie about where I got on. I was going to sneak off without paying. I was going to sneak off at Oxford Circus. You can if you know. But we're becoming a nation, aren't we? A nation of conformists. That's all we are. Look at Francis Drake. He was an individual, wasn't he? Francis Drake. I bet he didn't pay 30p when he came up from Plymouth every morning. Of course he didn't. He was off the Spanish. That's all he was doing. They teach a very different version of him in the Spanish history books, I can tell you. Oh, yes. But he was an individual. We're becoming just conformists all the time. Look at all these adverts. How about that? Just conforming adverts. Eat biscuits, keep slim, drink thermal underwear, be a traffic warden. Society is guilty, not the individual. I put it to you, society is guilty, and I am innocent. I'm innocent. What's your verdict? All right, I'm guilty, you rotten swine.
Piles, verrucas, dyspepsia, gum boils, blocked sinuses, chronic itching.
In the last year of his life, Kenneth Williams was sounding in his diaries like a man who was tiring of life. In one of his final TV appearances, he selected his favourite poem, which sounded, in retrospect, like a man reciting his own elegy.
This is from a Swinburne piece called The Garden of Proserpine. It's absolutely me. I can't tell you how much it's me. It's so wonderful because it's a poem about we are not sure of sorrow and joy was never sure. Today will die tomorrow. Time stops to no man's lure. And he's talking about the fact that life is wholly transient. And he says in this one verse from the end, it's the penultimate verse, he says, from too much love of living, from too much hope set free, we thank with brief thanksgiving, whatever gods may be, that no man lives forever, that dead men rise up never, and even the weariest river winds somewhere safe to sea. I think that is beautiful.
The comedy actor Kenneth Williams has died at the age of 62. He was found dead at his flat in North London this morning.
Kenneth Williams died on the 15th of April 1988 after an overdose of barbiturates. The inquest recorded an open verdict, as the coroner couldn't establish whether his death was suicide or an accident. Stanley Baxter recalls hearing the dreadful news.
Well, I can remember it vividly, because I got in the car and I switched the radio on, and to my amazement, it came the actor, comedian Kenneth Williams was found dead this morning at his home, and of course I nearly crashed the car. Well, people have argued about this so much. Did he take his own life or not? I think he probably did, you know. Although whether he knew he had actually done it, he'd certainly taken an overdose and hoped something nice would happen, and death happened. It was a big, big shock. Big shock.
Even though this is the undiscovered Kenneth Williams, we simply couldn't end without his signature song. What's not generally known about this clever parody that satirises the French histrionic chanson and British linguistic ignorance is that it was written by Kenneth and the butler from upstairs downstairs, his Scottish friend, Gordon Jackson.
This song, as the first time it's ever been performed in this country, is a rather beautiful ballad, so let's have a reverent hush. If you can't find him, find the curate. For this very beautiful number, which is entitled Ma Crêpe Suzette.
En est soi qui mal y pense, faites vos jeux reconnaissance. Anne Smith allait d'y danse, badinage ma crêpe Suzette, double entendre resteront Jacques Cousteau, Yves Saint-Laurent, où est la plume des matantes?
C'est la vie, ma crêpe Suzette.
What rubbish that was. Sentimental rubbish. Call that writing? Paul Sparks, does he? I saw no sign. Oh, the one with the hyphen gets 2 credits. I detest the font for these credits. I was a draftsman. Change the bloody font. Music. Cacophony, more like. They should add a bassoon. Oh, that's better. Ah, Stanley Baxter. He was brilliant. Hasn't aged a bit. I reckon he takes monkey glands. No, I do. You don't look that young without taking monkey glands. Oh, matron. I thought the chap who impersonated my voice at the end was very good. I didn't say that. Yes, you did. No, I didn't. He was rubbish. No, he wasn't. Yes, he was.